In the harsh land of the West, people can get used to the wind and sand, used to the silence of the hills, but no one can prepare for the feeling of being laughed at by the whole town, just because of their age. Elise stood there, alone amidst the contemptuous eyes, when people called her old, out of date. But at the moment, that seemed the cruelest. A man stepped forward, took her hand, and said something that made the whole world stop. To me, you don't belong to age. You are a person who transcends time. If it were you, would you have the courage to get off that bus? Do you have the courage to believe that your heart deserves to love again? Would you dare to choose love? When your whole life is filled with loss and judgment, let your heart respond when you hear this story. If the opening paragraph resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue on the most beautiful healing journey the West has ever seen. The afternoon fell slowly over the wild western landscape, the last rays of the sun spreading a deep golden line over the dusty ground, where only the wind and the wild grasses were companions. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in the small square of Rustic Hollow, a remote town nearly 200 miles from the bustling streets of the East Valley. The car door opened, and Elise Warren stepped out, her legs still trembling slightly from the long journey. Her stone-colored skirt, thin woolen coat, and dusty boots made her look even quieter among the eyes that were fixed on her. She took a deep breath. Her breath mixed with the cold wind, then put her hand on the small suitcase she had brought with her. She was 40, a woman who had once had a family, who had once had hope. But years of caring for her sick mother had eroded her future to the point where it seemed there was nothing left to hold on to. After her mother died, the silence that filled the house made Elise understand that she had very few options left, and one of those was to believe in a strange man, believe in a land she had never known, believe in the healing power of time. But Rustic Hollow did not welcome her with open arms. The people standing around the square stopped what they were doing to look. The whispers grew faint, then grew louder like waves passing by her ears. A middle-aged woman smacked her lips. A young girl laughed. A man spoke loud enough for Elise to hear. Jonah Callahan, mail ordering a wife. I thought he was looking for someone younger. My goodness, she looks like she's 40. Who would marry someone that age? He must be desperate. The whole group burst into laughter, their laughter ringing out crisp and heartless in the dusty, windy space. Elise stopped, her tired eyes suddenly stinging. She was not one to cry easily, but those words, that coldness, brought her back to the long, lonely years, the years when her mother's weak breathing was the only sound in the old house. There was a moment when Elise wanted to go back to the car and tell the driver to take her back where she had come from, but she knew she had no home to return to. Her mother was gone. The past was closed, and the future was here, as harsh as it seemed at first. She bowed her head and picked up the suitcase herself. Her hands were trembling slightly from the cold and embarrassment. She was afraid that she had made a stupid mistake. A gust of wind blew, carrying with it the slow sound of hooves from the end of the street. The crowd suddenly fell silent and turned. A tall figure on a dark brown horse slowly emerged into the last light of day. Jonah Callahan. A gray-brown leather jacket that reached to his knees, a wide-brimmed cowboy hat that hid most of his tanned face. He looked like an extension of the land, rugged, silent, full of unreadable stories. Jonah pulled on the reins, and the horse stopped a few feet from Elise. He dismounted, his boots clicking solidly on the dry ground. Elise looked up, her eyes meeting the man's ashen ones. No smile, no surprise. Just a deep, deep look, as if to read all the weariness in her. Then Jonah turned to face the crowd. His voice was not loud, but in that space, it echoed surprisingly clearly. "I've heard enough." The whole square was silent. Jonah reached out. He placed his hand on the suitcase Elise was struggling to hold. His hand was large, warm, and steady as a rock. "Her age isn't something to mock," he said, each word slow and clear, as if honed from stone. "It's the proof she survived." He looked around, his eyes colder than the wind blowing through the mountains. "To me, she's timeless." No one dared to laugh anymore. Elise stood still, as if her heart had been touched and suddenly began to beat again. His words were not sweet words. They were not the words of a man seeking to impress. They were the words of someone who had known loss, who understood that time not only takes away, but also leaves traces of endurance. Jonah turned back to look at Elise. "Are you ready?" Elise wanted to say something, but her throat tightened. She just nodded slightly. Jonah took the suitcase from her without waiting for a response. He placed it on the saddle. His movements were slow, deliberate, unhurried, like the way he spoke, and like the way he gave her time to walk toward him. He held out his hand, palm open, waiting for her to place hers. Elise looked at the hand. a hand marked by work, by weather, by patience. She touched it. For the first time in years, she felt she was no longer alone in the world. Jonah squeezed her hand gently, enough to let her know it wasn't an act of pity. It was a calm, quiet, powerful invitation to believe in what was ahead. They walked on together, leaving behind the mocking looks, the rumors, and the old prejudices of Rustic Hollow. But at that moment, on the porch of the grocery store, Abigail Crowley crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes at them. Her gaze darkened. Not everyone in town was pleased with Elise Warren's arrival. The afternoon wind blew long across the distant fields, but there was something different about Elise when she first got out of the car. In the fading light of the sunset, she felt a warmth she hadn't known in a long time, the feeling that someone was on her side. And so, Elise's journey begins. A journey of gentle courage, of facing herself, and of believing that, sometimes, a man's silence is where his deepest secrets lie. Elise walked beside Jonah as if in a dream she wasn't sure she had the right to touch. The square of Rustic Hollow receded behind her, the murmurs fading like wind-blown dust. Ahead was the dirt road leading out of town, dotted with rotting wooden fences and fields of pale yellow grass stretching to the foothills of the distant mountains. Jonah's horse walked steadily, its hooves pounding the dry earth low and slow. The space opened up so wide that Elise felt as if her past were being left behind, a hazy shadow she had carried for half her life. Jonah walked a few paces ahead to her right. He didn't say much, but his silence didn't feel awkward. It felt like a thick blanket over the chilly western air, helping her retain a fragile, newly formed courage. She looked at his back, his dust coat flowing in the wind, his shoulders broad and strong. There was something about him that softened Elise's heart. Not his physical charm, not his strength, but the feeling that he had lived through so much loss, so much silent pain, that his presence today was proof that a person could rise again after the greatest of brokenness. Elise followed the hills ahead. Wyoming was a rugged beauty, a beauty that evoked two opposing emotions, smallness and freedom. No tall buildings, no noise, just earth, sky, and wind. She had never been to a place like this, never seen such dark mountains against such vast sky. Jonah spoke, his voice deep despite the simple question. "Are you tired?" Elise shook her head. "I can still walk." "Don't worry. I'm not worried, but I want to make sure you're comfortable." There was no flirtation in his voice, just genuine concern, as calm as he was. Elise looked back. The wind blew through her red-brown hair, streaked with silver. She tucked her hands into the pockets of her wool coat, where her fingers still trembled. Not because of the cold, but because his words in the square still echoed in her head like a lone guitar playing in the weakest places of her heart. "To me, she's timeless." She wasn't used to people talking about her like that. All these years caring for her mother, Elise had been the one behind the door, the shadowy figure at the bedside, the hands always damp from changing bandages, the tired eyes staring at the clock in the long nights. No one in her hometown had noticed her. No one had really seen the woman who had once had a beautiful youth but had devoted it to duty. Jonah led her across a small wooden bridge. The water below flowed weakly, a pale silver color. Elise looked down, feeling a familiar emptiness, as if the water also carried fragments of her memories that the wind could not carry away. She had a family, a gentle but frail husband, a seemingly peaceful life, until illness took him away when they were too young. From then on, she devoted all her time to her mother. Old sadness piled on top of new sadness. She had forgotten what it was like to be cared for, to have someone think of her, to have someone wait for her to say something. Jonah stopped. He pointed to a large patch of land in the distance. "That's my farm." Elise looked. The wooden house loomed over the trees, its roof old and faded, its fence in need of repair, but what made her heart sink was the wide front yard. Empty, quiet, no children, no warmth of home, as if there had been a story there. And that story ended so abruptly. Jonah looked at her, his eyes not wavering. "I've lived alone for many years. I don't clean much. If you want to fix or change anything in the house, just let me know." She nodded. Barely a breath. "I don't mind. I'm used to housework." Jonah led her down the hallway. Elise touched the rough wood of the door, feeling the coldness under her fingertips. It wasn't the cold of the weather. It was the cold of the memories that lay dormant inside. He opened the door, letting her enter first. The house wasn't big, but I thought it was big enough for two people. The main room was warmer than she expected. The kitchen was to the left. The dining table was a worn pine, a bookshelf by the window, some of the books worn. Beside it were a set of old chairs facing the stone fireplace. Elise looked around. The objects in the house bore the marks of time, but a certain care, however feeble, remained. It was the care of a man who lived alone, but still tried to retain something of his former life. Jonah set her suitcase down against the wall near the stairs. "I'll clear out the little back room for you. You can rest there. When you're feeling better, we'll talk again." He started to walk away, but Elise spoke up. "You don't have to keep your distance. I understand this is strange for you, too." Jonah turned, his eyes neither cold nor readable. "She came here for a new future. I just wanted to make sure I didn't scare her." Elise pursed her lips. "I was scared when I left home, but the only thing that kept me going was the hope that somewhere would welcome me. I didn't need anything fancy. I just wanted to be treated like a human being." Jonah stood still for a moment. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, like the heart of the house breathing again after years of silence. He spoke so softly that Elise had to lean in to hear. "You will be respected here. That I can promise." The late afternoon light softened outside the window, bathing them both in a warm, golden glow. Elise felt her heart stop trembling. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she believed this trip could be a beginning. The space in the wooden house made Elise feel like she was entering a place that had been silent for too long. The walls were covered with a thick layer of time. The wood smelled of old pine resin. What caught her attention most was the special neatness. The neatness of a man who lived alone but knew his own self. Every item was in its place, simple but orderly. Elise touched the wooden table. The surface was cold but smooth. She looked around, saw some old sewing, a neatly folded tablecloth. It was a mark of her ex-wife. She knew without being told. The remnants reminded the house of a time when it had been warm. Jonah stood near the door, his eyes on her but not pressing. He let her observe things at her own pace, without interrupting or explaining much. There was something about that calmness that made Elise less self-conscious. She said softly, "His house is so peaceful." Jonah replied, his voice soft. "Being alone for too long makes one feel safe, but not quite at peace." The answer made Elise pause. She didn't ask further. She didn't want to touch a wound that was probably still raw inside him. She walked to the window that overlooked the yard. The wind shook the apple trees. The orchard must have been tended by someone. Maybe Jonah's wife. Elise touched the window and felt the wind from outside, filtering through the cracks in the wood, carrying with it a faint scent of earth and fruit that had once ripened here. Jonah placed her small suitcase in the back room. The door was ajar so she could see inside. The bed was made, the sheets fresh, the blankets a light gray. It was clear he had taken her arrival seriously, not just casually or casually. She looked at him. "When did he arrange a room for me?" "Quite a while. I don't know when you'll be arriving, but I want the room ready." Elise felt her heart soften. His concern was not loud. It was like a small light placed in the right place at the right time. Not bright, but enough to help a lost person find their way. She put her hand on the bed to check. The room was warm. "Thank you." Jonah nodded, saying nothing. He walked over to the stove and added more wood to the fire. The golden light fell on his face, revealing deep lines at the corners of his eyes. Not lines of mere age, the lines of someone who had hurt too much. Elise went out onto the porch and saw the farm from its best angle. The driveway had old tire tracks. The fence leaned in places. The barn stood still, as if waiting for repair. There had been laughter on this farm. There had been hope. But now all that remained was the slow breath of time. She turned inside when she heard Jonah call, "Would you like some tea?" She nodded and sat down in the chair facing the fireplace. The water in the kettle was simmering softly. Jonah poured tea into 2 old enamel cups. He set one cup in front of Elise and sat across from her. She took a small sip. "I'm not used to the taste of tea here," he asked. "Different from where she used to live?" She nodded, remembering the days she spent caring for her mother in the small house. "Back there, I drank herbal tea. This was stronger." Jonah smiled briefly. "I made this myself. It's not very good, but it's easy to drink." Elise looked at the tea, then at him. Not that it wasn't good, just new. The silence stretched for a moment. It wasn't tense, Just two people trying to find a common rhythm to begin a new life. Elise sensed a slight awkwardness between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like two hands not used to holding each other, needing a moment to fit together. The fire crackled. The house began to warm. Elise stood and walked to the bookshelf. She ran her hand gently through the books, westerns, books about horses, a few books of poetry. She pulled out a thin book of poetry and opened it. The writing was soft and beautiful. Jonah whispered from behind. I rarely read poetry aloud, but I kept those. She asked, Why do you like them? Jonah looked into the flames, his voice low. It was as still as the earth here. But if you looked closely, you could feel something warm beneath the surface, like something alive, even if no one was paying attention. Elise was silent. She understood what he meant by those words. She knew he was talking about himself. She returned the books to their places and turned back to the table. This farm has a lot of work to do. I don't know how much I can help, but I want to help you. Jonah looked at her for a moment. No rush. Just get used to it. Then I'll tell you what to do. Elise chuckled. I'm not one to sit still. If left alone, I'll fidget. Jonah propped himself up on his hands and knees, leaning toward her. I don't think she's weak. I don't expect her to change for me. I just hope she feels like this is where she can stay. She answered slowly. I wanted to believe it, but I was still afraid. Jonah wasn't surprised. Who isn't afraid to step into a new life? I was afraid too. Elise looked at him. What was he afraid of? Jonah didn't answer right away. He spoke slowly after a long while, afraid that he wasn't good enough to keep someone. The words made Elise choke. He didn't look at her, but his ashen eyes held a bottomless loss. She knew he was talking about his ex-wife, about what he had lost. Elise didn't comfort him. She didn't touch him. She just said softly, I'm not going anywhere. At least not yet. Jonah nodded slightly. A silent acknowledgement. Outside, the light faded. Elise stood up, walked to the window, and looked back at the apple orchard. Though abandoned, it was still beautiful. It seemed like it was just waiting for a hand to bring it back to life. Maybe I'm like this garden, Elise whispered to herself. Not completely dead, just needing someone to believe I can still bloom. Over the next few days, Elise grew accustomed to the rhythm of life at the Callahan farm. The wind rustling through the wooden roof, the sound of water in the jar by the door, the soft scrabbling of horses on the dirt floor in the stable. It all played a slow music she didn't think she could understand. But somehow it made her feel at peace. She learned to build a fire, true Western style. She replaced the sheer curtains with heavier ones. She cleared the bookshelves, wiped the window frames, rearranged the little things Jonah seemed to have left untouched for a long time. Her hands were gentle but firm, each task carrying the care of someone who wanted to bring the house back to life. Jonah watched each change in silence, not the silence of someone who doesn't care, but the silence of someone who sees everything but doesn't try to steal someone else's spotlight. Sometimes he squinted at Elise as she carried the basket of wilted apples out into the backyard, or blew dust off the windowsill, or tried to rehang the old lantern. The look always left Elise a little unsettled, but also strangely warm. One day, Jonah decided to take her into the town of Rustic Hollow to buy supplies. Elise wasn't sure she wanted to return to a place that had made her feel so humiliated, but she didn't want to appear weak. She tied her hair back, put on a dark sweater, and mounted her horse with the confidence she had built up over the past few days. The town hadn't changed. The same dusty streets, the same small shops with rusty tin roofs, the same familiar faces she'd seen when she'd gotten off the stagecoach. When Jonah stopped his horse in front of Mr. Barker's grocery store, Elise felt eyes turn to watch them. Jonah tied up his horse and stepped into the shop first. Elise followed. The bell above the door jingled softly. The interior was more spacious and light than she had expected. Long wooden shelves were filled with bags of flour, boxes of nails, bottles of oil, rope, and a few small household items. Mr. Barker, a pot-bellied man with a gray mustache, stepped out from behind the counter. He perked up when he saw Jonah Callahan. "It's been a long time since you've walked in here." Jonah nodded, hand on the shopping list. "I need some flour, salt, and a few other things." Mr. Barker looked at Elise. His gaze paused for half a second, not mocking, but curious. "This must be." Jonah answered immediately, his voice calm but firm. "Elise Warren, the one who will be living with me at the farm." Elise felt several glances from people nearby, some sympathetic, some unreadable, some cold. She straightened her back, trying to keep her composure. A group of women were picking fabric in the opposite corner. Elise recognized one of the faces. Abigail Crowley. Brown hair tied back, sharp features. The look she gave Elise was unfriendly. Not loud, but enough for Elise to know she didn't want her in Jonah's life. Abigail moved closer. Her lips curved into a polite smile, but her eyes were cold. So she was Elise. I had heard that Jonah was looking for someone through pen pals, but I didn't think it would be someone as mature as her. Elise knew the remark was more than a remark. It was a knife wrapped in velvet. She tried to keep her voice soft. "I'm just trying to start a new life." Abigail tilted her head. "Of course. But Jonah deserves someone who can give him a long-term future. I just hope you understand that." The people around them fell silent, watching. Elise felt the blood rush to her ears. She didn't want Jonah to hear this. She didn't want him to be talked about because of her choices. But before she could respond, Jonah was walking toward them. Elise couldn't see which direction he was coming from, but his presence made the world stop. He set the bag of flour on the counter, his eyes fixed on Abigail. The future she spoke of was not something anyone could age for. Abigail paused slightly. Jonah continued. "I want someone with character, someone who can stand firm in difficult years. I want someone with kindness and sincerity. Elise has all of those qualities." He paused. His stance was as calm and steady as the trunk of an old oak. No one needed to measure her worth with prejudiced eyes. The air was heavy. The onlookers looked down, pretending to sort through their purchases. Abigail frowned, squeezing the canvas bag in her hand. She tried to be polite, but her voice was bitter. "Well, I wish you two luck." Abigail left the store, her heels clicking disapprovingly on the wooden floor. Elise stood still, her hands clutching the edge of her coat. Jonah looked at her. His eyes held no blame, only a characteristic calm. Elise took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to get dragged into this because of me." "No one dragged me in," Jonah said. "I stepped in on my own. And I did it because I felt it was right, not because anyone forced me to protect you." Elise looked down, not wanting him to see the emotion rising in her eyes, a warmth mixed with pain. She wasn't used to someone standing up for her like this. The protection was unrushed, unobtrusive, but as sure as the ground beneath her feet. In that moment, Elise felt something clearly. She wasn't the only one afraid. Jonah was trying to break through his own walls too, and the two of them, from two completely different directions, were trying to reach the middle without hurting the other. As she left the store, Elise felt tired, but not weak. It was like a strong wind had blown through, leaving bare ground for new seeds to sprout. She looked at Jonah as they mounted. He turned, meeting her gaze. No words were spoken, but there was a quiet understanding between them. Elise settled into the saddle, no longer feeling as shaky as she had the first time. She thought she could endure any stare from Rustic Hollow, as long as she had a man by her side who would stand up for her in the simplest yet most powerful way, speaking the truth in a calm voice. As she left town, Elise looked back. The dusty streets and cold eyes no longer made her feel as small as they had before. She knew the prejudice was still there, but she also knew the coming days would give her a chance to learn more about Jonah, about herself, and about why he wanted her around. There are paths that only open up when you keep moving forward despite your fear. Elise found herself walking down that path. The ride back to the Callahan Ranch was a quiet one. Elise sat behind Jonah, keeping her balance but her mind still racing. Rustic Hollow was still an unpredictable place, a place that made her both hopeful and cautious. But the calm beside Jonah helped ease the tension in her heart. The wind blew across the vast grassland, causing each tuft of grass to sway as if it were talking to the earth and sky. The distant mountains faded into a gray-green hue, like natural walls protecting this wild land. Elise looked at the landscape and felt as if she were standing on the border between an old life and a new beginning. Each stroke of the horse pressed down a piece of memory, making her feel more clearly that she had truly left the past behind. When they reached the yard, Elise got out first, holding the reins as Jonah led the horse to the stable. The little eagle was perched on the fence, blinking at them. The wind rustled through the old fence, creating a faint yet familiar whisper. Elise realized that since arriving here, she had come to understand the rhythm of life here through such small sounds. She went straight to the porch, took off her coat, and hung it neatly on a wooden hook. The kitchen still smelled of the weak tea Jonah had made when they left. Elise looked at the enamel cup on the table, the dark stain still lingering in the bottom. She thought of the look in his eyes when he said he was afraid too. It was the first time she had seen a Western man show weakness so naturally. When Jonah entered the house, his dusty boots made a dry, squeaking sound on the floor. He dusted off his coat and hung it on the hook next to Elise's. Their coats lay side by side, a small image that warmed Elise's heart, not because of the closeness, but because it made her feel as if the place was accepting her presence. Jonah asked. "Are you okay?" Elise replied softly. "I'm fine. Just need some time to get used to the town." He nodded. They needed time. Not everyone liked change. Elise sat down at the wooden table, her hands resting lightly on the surface. "I can bear the bad words. What I fear is the trouble it will cause him." Jonah pulled up a chair across from me. If I wanted to avoid embarrassment, I wouldn't have sent out a letter looking for a mate. I know what I chose. "Elise, you don't have to carry that burden for me." She pursed her lips, unsure how to respond. His words were simple, but there was a directness to them that made her feel truly seen. Not pitied, not tolerated, but respected. Elise stood up and headed for the kitchen. "I think I'll make something for dinner. Nothing too complicated, just a light soup." Jonah watched her move between the old shelves. "If you need anything, let me know." Elise smiled. "I'll manage. Since Mother got sick, I've gotten used to being on my own." Jonah looked at her shoulders. She had lived too quietly. Everyone deserved someone by their side. Elise bent over the pot, trying to hide the wavering in her eyes. She mixed simple ingredients, some potatoes, carrots, and shallots. The aroma of these simple things filled the small kitchen. Jonah stood up to help her peel some potatoes, moving slowly but carefully. They worked together without much talking. The silence in the kitchen did not create distance. On the contrary, it maintained an inexplicable harmony. After a while, when the soup began to simmer, Elise put her spoon down by the stove. She sat down on a chair near the window, watching the sparse light cast on the thin streaks of dust. Her heart suddenly felt a little bewildered. The bewilderment of someone who was gradually becoming attached to a place she didn't know if she could fully trust. Jonah noticed. He pulled his chair closer. Was something bothering her? It took Elise a few breaths to answer. "I wasn't sure I had the strength to overcome the town's prejudices. I'd endured plenty of tongues. But this time, I was afraid of disappointing him. Jonah leaned back in his chair, his ashen eyes softening. I don't care what they think, and I won't let anyone judge you. The only thing that would disappoint me is if you don't give me a chance. The words were like a touch so light, yet so deep. Elise did not respond immediately. She looked down at her hands. The fingers that had cared for her mother, that had trembled when burying her husband, that had held a pen to write a letter to a stranger. Now, they rested on a wooden table in the arid west, presiding over a future she had never dared to imagine. After a moment, Elise asked, "Why aren't you afraid I'll leave?" Jonah was silent for a few seconds, because I saw in her what I had lost in myself: endurance. Elise raised her head to look into his eyes. Endurance isn't always strength. Jonah spoke softly. But if anyone understood how powerful it became, it was her. The room fell silent again. Not empty, but like two people sitting side by side, listening to the parts of their hearts shift. The soft simmer of the soup brought Elise back to the present. She stood and ladled out 2 bowls. I hoped the taste wasn't too foreign to him. Jonah took the bowl from her. I was used to simple meals, but it wasn't the taste that mattered. It was who cooked it. The words made Elise's heart flutter. If he said that, I would feel overappreciated. Jonah looked straight at her. The worthy should be appreciated. Elise bent over her soup, steam clouding her eyelids. She didn't know if she was blushing from the heat or from the words, but for the first time in years, home felt more than just a place of things, but a place of peace. After dinner, Elise cleared the table. Jonah placed some chopped wood near the stove. They both moved slowly. Each gesture was deliberate, as if learning to transition from their separate lives to a new rhythm together. When it was dark, Elise stood on the windowsill and looked up at the vast sky. The stars were bright in the empty space. She heard Jonah come and stand beside her. He didn't speak, just followed her gaze. A moment of silence that brought them both closer. Elise asked softly, "Jonah, do you ever believe that a person can find peace after years of loss?" Jonah answered slowly, "I believe. But peace doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from no longer being afraid to remember." Elise closed her eyes. The words touched a soft spot in her heart. She opened them after a few breaths and turned to look at Jonah. "I'll try. I don't know how far I can go, but I want to try." Jonah nodded slightly. That was enough. Deep down, Elise clearly felt that these were the first days of her rebirth. No noise, no flash, just a quiet flow back into her heart, a warmth that she thought she had lost forever. The rhythm of life at the Callahan farmhouse became clearer to Elise. Each morning she did little things to brighten up the house, wipe the light dust from the walls, rearrange mementos on shelves, gather up old junk. Jonah never told her to do it, but the way he looked around the house each time he entered told Elise that the changes were making the place breathe easier. Jonah often spent his time in the stables or checking the fences. He worked quietly, steadily, without needing to be urged. Elise watched him from the window, a man who had weathered too many storms, yet he kept his composure with every step. His broad shoulders seemed to withstand the wind. She saw his strength, but she also sensed that something inside him had been so badly damaged that it would not be easy to mend. One afternoon, Elise went out to the backyard, trying to clean up the apple orchard that had been abandoned for several years. The grass was overgrown. The roots of the old trees were tangled together. Elise picked up a hoe and bent down to pull out the tough grass roots. She breathed evenly, her movements slow but determined. Jonah approached from a distance. He stopped, arms crossed, and looked at her for a few moments before speaking. She didn't need to work so hard. Elise looked up, smiling. I just wanted to see if I could revive this garden a little. He came closer and bent down to pick up some dry twigs. This place used to be beautiful. There was a time when I tended to it every day. But then, I stopped coming here. Elise stopped, for his wife's sake. Jonah didn't answer right away. His eyes wandered to the gray trunks of the trees. Sarah loved this garden. She planted every single one. When she died, I tried to keep it, but looking at this only reminded me of how empty the house was. Elise put the hoe down. I know that feeling better than you think. Jonah looked over, his eyes true. She had lost someone too? Elise inhaled slowly. My husband died in our 4th year of marriage. The disease took him too quickly. I never got to tell him I forgave him for missing so many of our moments together. I was young, full of hope. After that, I became someone who stayed by his bedside, refusing to believe in anything. Jonah put his hand on the apple tree, as if searching for an emotional anchor. A loss never goes away. It just changes form. Elise nodded, but I thought, if I let it control me, I would never get anywhere. Her words left Jonah silent for a long time. Elise did not press him further. She knew some pains needed silence to breathe. As they both bent down to pick up the dry branches, Elise felt the distance between them shrink, not because of the comforting words, but because of the sharing from the deepest parts of each other. Jonah said it himself. I thought I would never open my heart again. I didn't have the confidence to start over, but when I read your letter, something stopped me. Elise looked up. He read a lot of copies. 2 letters, 1 from you, 1 from someone else. After reading the first one, I didn't feel like writing back, but yours made me think you know what it's like to start over with tired hands. So, I'm writing again. Elise felt her heart soften. I don't write to many people either. Jonah. I only write because I'm afraid I've never lived for myself. He gave her a long look. She was right. No one could blame someone for wanting to live again. Elise bent down and continued weeding, trying to hide her reddening eyes. The wind blew through the apple orchard, the scent of old wood mixed with the smell of damp earth, like the smell of long-forgotten memories, now touched and awakened by the sunlight. After a while of work, Elise sat down on the wooden step to rest. Jonah brought 2 glasses of water. He sat beside her, not too close, but close enough for her to feel his steady presence. Elise spoke slowly. Abigail had said some harsh things in town. I knew she cared for him in her own way, but maybe she didn't like me. Jonah replied immediately. Abigail had no right to judge anyone I let into my life. Elise looked him in the eye. But would the town accept what was between us? I am old. No one would believe a man like you would choose a woman like me. Jonah took a sip of water, his voice so low that even the wind stopped to hear. Elise, if I was afraid of what people would think, I would have lived differently. I lost my wife. I lost my family. I don't want to lose anything else just because someone else thinks it's unreasonable. Elise squeezed the cup in her hand. But if this choice got him talked about. He interrupted her in a voice as calm and firm as the ground beneath his feet. The only thing I regret is if I let someone else's prejudices decide who stood next to me. The words fell on the quiet courtyard, making Elise choke. There was a truth she had known but never dared to admit. Jonah didn't choose her because she was convenient, not because she could replace someone else. He chose her because he saw in her what he had always held in himself: quiet perseverance. Near the end of the session, Elise was about to pack up when Jonah touched her elbow, a small touch but enough to make her stop. I'll finish. You've done enough. Elise shook her head. I'm not tired yet. I know. But let me do the rest this time. His voice was small, but there was something inside it that made Elise pause. A little concern, a little protectiveness, a little fear that someone would disappear like his past. Elise put down the hoe. Okay. But I want to continue with you tomorrow, Jonah replied. I hope so. As they entered the house, Elise sensed a small but distinct change between them. Not a rush of love, not a romantic flare-up, but like two broken people trying to stand next to each other without adding to each other's wounds. Something is sprouting, soft, delicate, but durable, and Elise understood that the seedling needed both of them to nurture it if it wanted to one day become a tree big enough to protect their hearts. The next few days passed like a slow stream, not rushed, but not still either. Elise and Jonah worked side by side more. They shared moments so small they seemed unnoticeable, but it was those little things that gradually changed Elise's heart. The apple orchard behind the house was beginning to show signs of life. The weeds were more than half gone. The soil had been loosened. The old apple trees had been pruned. Elise looked out from the windowsill whenever she rested, feeling as if she were looking at herself, something long forgotten, but not dead. If only someone had the patience to wake it. One afternoon, Elise brought out into the yard some old seeds she had found in a forgotten wooden box in the corner of the kitchen. The box had Sarah's name etched into it. She opened the lid and found several seed packets inside, wrapped in faded brown paper. Elise touched the faded writing. The handwriting was soft, beautiful, and light, like the person who had written it. She stood still, feeling as if she were entering a sacred space that she should tread carefully. At that moment, Jonah appeared on the porch. He stopped when he saw the wooden box in her hands. His gaze slowed, as if a thin mist had passed over it. She said softly, I found them when I was cleaning out the corner of the cupboard. I think I could replant some. Jonah walked over, not touching the box, just looking. She had loved keeping the seeds here. Sarah always wanted this garden to grow back every year. Elise remained silent for a few heartbeats. I apologize if touching them made you uncomfortable. Jonah shook his head. No. What bothers me is letting them sit there without anyone replanting them. His voice sounded like old wood blooming in the sun, tired but ready to step through another layer of memory. Elise understood the change in his tone. A small door had opened, not wide, not loud, but one that only someone who truly wanted to move forward would dare open. Elise hugged the box to her chest. If you'll let me, I want to plant them, partly to revive the garden, partly to preserve the beauty she created. Jonah looked at her for a long time. I trust you to do it the right way. That sentence made Elise feel a warm current spread through her chest, not because he was praising her, but because he had entrusted her with a part of his most important memory. The two of them entered the garden and selected a few clean beds to plant. Elise bent down first, carefully placing each tiny seed into the soil. Jonah stood behind her, his shadow stretching out in a solid shape on the ground. Elise had no idea what he was thinking, but the silence made her feel protected. She asked, Before, you and your wife used to work here together. Jonah crouched down beside me, adding more soil to the beds. We argued a lot about what to plant first. She liked flowers. I liked fruit trees. Eventually, the garden had flowers and apples. Elise smiled. It carried the scent of both of them. Jonah sighed. Sometimes I thought this garden would never be touched again. I thought I'd grown used to it fading away over time. But watching her work, I regretted letting it wither for so long. Elise put her hand to the new soil. It's never too late if we bring it back to life with sincerity. Jonah looked at her profile. I couldn't tell if her words were meant to comfort me or make me think. Elise bowed her head slightly. I only said what I truly felt. The two of them continued their work in silence. Together, they planted the seeds, the dots, of a new chapter in each other's lives. Elise felt Jonah's warmth without needing his touch. Just having him close enough was enough to know she was no longer alone. At the end of the day, as they stood to look at the tended beds, Elise brushed the dust from her hands. Jonah handed her a towel. Elise took it, feeling like she was receiving something more meaningful than a towel. She wiped her hands and handed it back. Jonah said in a low voice, "Thank you. This garden looks different." Elise looked at the garden, then at him. It was a joint effort. Jonah was silent for a beat. But without her, I don't know if I would have had the courage to step into this place. The words cut straight to Elise's heart, a truth unseen, a wound still there, but not hidden. Not hidden. She knew she was not Sarah's replacement. She never wanted to be anyone else's shadow, but Jonah had shown her he saw her as someone who could accompany her, not as a place to fill, but as a new starting point. Elise spoke so softly that the wind stopped to hear. "Jonah, if I were to enter your life, I wanted to do so with respect for the past you held. I didn't want to compete with any memory. I just wanted to stand in the rest of your life, not to replace anyone, but to walk with you." Jonah looked at her as if he could read her thoughts. His ashen eyes held a faint but sincere surprise. She understood that better than anyone. Elise took a deep breath, feeling as if she had let go of a burden she had carried for so long. "I understand, because I have loved and lost too. I understand that no pain can be forgotten. We just learn to live with it." Jonah looked down at his rough hands, hands that had gripped reins, buried lovers, worked until they bled. His voice was as deep as the dark earth. I wanted to believe I could live with the pain and not be alone. Elise placed her hand in the new soil, her palm touching the seeds they had planted. "I'm still here, if you want me." A deep silence stretched between them, the smell of damp earth and the fading light. Jonah stepped closer, just close enough for Elise to hear his breathing. "I want." Elise looked up. "Are you sure?" Jonah looked her straight in the eyes. "I'd known since the day I walked into Rustic Hollow Square to pick you up. I was just waiting for you to be ready to hear it from me." Elise's heart beat slowly, like a distant drum, unhurried but heavy. A new confidence was forming. She smiled slightly, not a big smile, but enough to light up her face in a way she rarely let on, Jonah added, his voice quieter but deep enough to touch her innermost thoughts. "Elise, I don't know what the future holds, but I want to build it with you." Elise was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Me too." The apple orchard lay before them, with rows of freshly sown soil, a testament that even things once neglected can come back to life if cared for with sincerity. Two people who had been hurt and lost now stood together. No vows, no ostentatious promises, just a quiet but steadfast consensus. A new page of their lives begins from this very moment. The air at Callahan Farm was softer after the days Elise and Jonah had worked on the apple orchard. Elise had come to know the sounds around her. The sound of water running underground when she turned on the pump, the soft hooves of birds perched on the barn roof, the sighs of horses in the stables when the silence fell. These little things, together, made her feel like the place accepted her. One afternoon, as Elise was removing weeds from around the apple tree, Jonah came up to her with a new hoe. He set it down and stood for a moment, staring at the sky. Something made Elise follow his gaze. The sky beyond the mountains was no longer clear. Thick black clouds were closing in, slowly but surely. Elise recognized the color of the sky, a kind of darkness that spread from afar, as if it were about to engulf everything. Jonah whispered, "The storm is coming." Elise stood up, brushing the dirt off her hands. "Do you need me to prepare anything?" He nodded. "We need to tie down the roof and secure the loose boards. Storms are unusual in this area. Some years, with only light rain, the winds are strong enough to blow the fence down." Elise looked at the apple trees that had yet to take root. And this garden. Jonah shook his head slightly. "You go in first. I'll take care of the outside." Elise knew he was saying this to keep her safe, but her stubbornness kept her from leaving right away. "I can help. 2 people would be faster." Jonah looked at her for a long time. "I don't want you to get hurt." Elise stood, her gaze steady. "I'm not so weak that a single wind can knock me over. Jonah, let me work with you." He was silent, then bent down to pick up the hoe and gave it to her. "Okay, but if the wind gets too strong, she must come in immediately." She nodded. They worked together, saying little. Elise held the boards while Jonah hammered them in. A few gusts of wind blew hard enough to send dust flying, but they continued, keeping their eyes on each other in silence. With the barn roof secured and the weather fence erected, Jonah pulled Elise inside. The wind at their backs was a warning that they had finished just in time. The sound of the door closing brought a sudden sense of security. Elise stood close to the door for a few seconds, listening to the wind pounding the roof. Jonah stood behind her, breathing slowly. He brushed the dust off his jacket, then looked at her. "Are you okay?" Elise nodded. "Just a little cold." Jonah walked over, took a thin blanket from the chair, and gently covered her shoulders. She shouldn't be cold in the mountain wind. Elise clutched the blanket. "Thank you." The wind howled outside the roof, growing stronger. Elise looked out the window. The sky seemed to be stretching. She spoke softly. "In Rustic Hollow. How often do storms like this happen?" Jonah sat in a chair near the fireplace, his eyes on the door. "Not often. But when they did, they often brought trouble. Strong winds could blow roofs off houses. Lightning sometimes set barns on fire. At this time of year, storms also worried the townspeople about crop failure." Elise shuddered. "I don't want all our work in the garden to go to waste." Jonah looked into her eyes. "What is worth keeping finds a way to survive. Like people." The words made Elise feel a pang. She thought back to her old life. The life where she had tried to hold on to things but had let them slip away because of circumstances. The memories no longer hurt as much as they used to, but they were enough to make her silent for a moment. The wind grew louder. Elise heard the scrape of wood against the wall, the soft rattle of a shutter. Each sound seemed to underscore the fragility of humankind in the face of nature. In that moment, Elise realized she had not just taken a ride here. She was starting her life over. In this vast, uncertain landscape, she needed courage. Jonah stood up and walked to the window to check. "I'll go out and see if the fence can hold up." Elise reflexively held his hand back. How could she leave it like this? He looked down at where her hand rested on his. "I had to make sure it was safe. I was used to storms in this area." Elise kept her hand on his, knowing her words wouldn't stop him. "Be careful. Don't think you can always stand." Jonah looked at her for a long time. "I'll be right back. I don't make a habit of leaving anyone in the house alone." She let go of her hand slowly. "I wait for him." Jonah put on his coat, opened the door, and walked out of the house. Elise watched him disappear into the wind and rain. Her instincts kicked in, not for the fence, but for him. The storm made everything small, but it also exposed her greatest fear. losing someone she was beginning to cherish. Elise stepped back, sitting by the fire, hugging Jonah's blanket tightly around her shoulders. In the silences between the wind, she could hear her heartbeat. Uneasy, but also clear. She was deeper into the life of this place than she thought. Lightning flashed outside the window. Elise jumped up and looked out into the whiteness. Jonah was nowhere to be seen. Her hands were cold. She walked to the door and pressed her ear to it. Wind, rain, but no hoofbeats or call from him. A wave of anxiety surged through her. She grabbed the doorknob, wanting to run outside, but her mind held her back. The wind was so strong it was hard to keep her footing even when she opened the door. But what if something happened to Jonah? Elise took a step back, her heart torn. The feeling was familiar. She had sat by her husband's bedside, heard his labored breathing, and been unable to do anything. She had lived with that helplessness, and now it was coming back. Only Jonah was the one who could stand on his own. But that didn't ease her worry. Finally, as Elise was about to put on her coat and head out, the door swung open. Jonah stood there, his coat soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, a few streaks of dirt on his face, but he held his ground. Elise rushed toward him as if her last worry had been too much to bear. He closed the door. "I'm sorry to have worried you." Elise grabbed his arm. "I think." He was blown away. Jonah looked at her hand that was holding his so tightly. "I said I would come back." Elise didn't know how to respond. All she knew was that she let out a long breath, like someone who had just escaped a deep fear she didn't dare admit. Jonah put his hand on hers. "You don't have to worry about that. I'm used to storms." Elise looked at him, her emotions gone. "I don't want to lose anyone else." Jonah froze. "Elise." She let go, but her voice still trembled slightly. "Sorry, I shouldn't have said that." Jonah stepped closer, his head tilted slightly to look her in the eye. She had every right to be worried, and I understood why. I had been there, scared of losing someone I cared about when I could do nothing about it. Elise felt her heart pound at that. He cares about me. Jonah doesn't shy away. Yes, a lot, but I don't want to rush her. True feelings don't need to be forced. They just need to be honest. Elise stood still, feeling as if the storm outside had moved inside her. But this time it wasn't cold wind. It was unexpected warmth. Jonah handed her the towel. "You're worried about me. I can't let anything happen to me." "Elise, I'm still here." That made Elise choke. "I knew." Jonah looked at her for a long moment, then spoke in a voice hoarse from the wind. "You should rest. The storm will last. I'm right here." Elise walked back to her chair, but her mind was not the same. Something had changed. Small, but real. The storm outside shook the windows, but in the wooden house, between the two people sitting a few steps apart, there was a strange silence, a closeness that did not require touching, but was deeper than ever before. The storm lasted longer than Elise had expected. The wind was fading, but the rumble of the late rain still echoed from the foothills. The cabin was enveloped in a thick, post-storm silence, the kind where you can hear your own breathing. Elise sat near the fireplace, her hands still warm from the blanket Jonah had wrapped around her earlier. On the table, the oil lamp cast a soft yellow light, illuminating her face with a vague, indescribable look. Ever since Jonah had safely entered, her heart had not truly calmed down. Across the room, Jonah changed into a dry shirt and came over, sitting on the wooden chair opposite. He studied Elise for a moment, as if considering something important. His gaze made Elise sense a seriousness in him that was different from before. Elise asked softly, "Is something on your mind?" Jonah put his hands on his knees, rubbing them together a little. I have things I haven't told you. Not that it's a bad thing, but I owe you the truth." The statement made Elise straighten her back even more. I was listening. Jonah took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage that Western men often keep hidden. There was a letter. It had arrived after I had posted the ad. It was from your husband's brother. Elise paused. Her palms were shaking uncontrollably. What was he writing? Jonah looked at her with great care. He wrote that she had had a good but sad marriage, that her husband's death had left her in a state of silence for many years. He said she was a good woman, just lonely, and that she deserved another chance to start a family. Elise bowed her head, clutching the edge of the blanket. I wondered who he was writing to again. Jonah continued. I kept the letter because I didn't want to bring it up until she was ready. But tonight, seeing how worried she was about me, I knew I couldn't keep quiet. Elise, your past doesn't make me shy away. It only makes me respect you more. Elise looked up. In the flickering light of the fireplace, her eyes were watery but not weak. How could he believe such words when he knew nothing about me? Jonah replied in a low, honest voice. Because I see courage in everything you do. Weak people don't come here. Weak people don't silently endure the harsh gaze of this town while remaining kind in their actions. Elise, I believed you from the start. The letter was meant to help me understand, not judge. Elise touched the edge of the chair lightly, as if needing support. I used to be afraid to talk about the past because I thought it would drive people away. Jonah shook his head. The past is just footprints, not chains. Only those who suppress it find it heavy. A deep silence fell between them. Elise felt her throat dry, as if something were stuck. The air was warm, not because of the heat, but because of the sincerity that was opening up undisguised. Jonah leaned forward. I had a confession to make. I was starting to care about her more than I intended. I kept my distance because I didn't want her to feel pressured. But when I saw her standing there, waiting for me in the storm, I knew that if I lost her, I would regret it for the rest of my life. Elise blinked. You don't have to say that if only because I'm worried about you. Jonah smiled, a rare smile. I said it because it was the truth. I didn't want to leave things unsaid that I would regret. Elise looked down at her palms and sighed softly. There was a part of me that was afraid of new feelings, afraid of losing something precious again. But I realized the fear only grew the more I tried to avoid it. Here, with him, I felt safe in a special way. Jonah stood up, walked closer to her, stopping right in front of the fireplace. Elise, let me make this clear. Age has not made you less. Loss has not stopped you. Your heart is still beautiful. To me, you are not old, not late. You are beyond measure. Elise, you are a woman undimmed by time, timeless, like the life unfolding before you. Those words made Elise feel as if the storm outside had completely dissipated, a peace so deep she couldn't escape. She stood up and approached Jonah. His face was warm in the firelight. His eyes were deep but gentle, as if trying to soothe all the wounds that had lain dormant inside her. Elise spoke softly, almost in a whisper. Jonah, I don't know how much more I can walk with anyone, but if anyone is strong enough for me to lean on, it's you. Jonah placed his hand on her shoulder, lightly, as if asking permission before continuing. I will go with you at the pace you choose. Not fast, not pushy, just sincere. Elise felt the warmth from that hand spread to her heart. It was a new yet profound feeling that made her feel reborn. She whispered, I believe you. Jonah touched her hand lightly. Thank you for that. A distant clap of thunder sounded. But this time it did not startle Elise. In the small cabin in the vast west, two people who had suffered much loss stood before each other. no longer avoiding each other. Outside, the last sounds of the storm drifted away, as if clearing the space for something to blossom between them. Not a hasty passion, but a tenderness that lasted long enough to become a support. Elise looked at the fire, her voice slowing, deepening. "If you give me time, I will open up. Slowly, but I will." Jonah smiled. "I can wait. Because what I want is not a hasty promise. I want you to choose me with your own peace." Elise nodded slightly. "I'm choosing in that moment." Everything seemed to fall into place. No past weighed down. No shadow loomed ahead. Just two people standing side by side, finding themselves in the silence after the storm. The morning after the storm. The western sky seemed washed clean. The sunlight bathed Rustic Hollow in a soft yellow, making the water stains on the tree branches sparkle like glass. Elise stood on the steps of the cabin, her hands touching the dew-dampened railing. She took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air as a gift. Jonah was inspecting the stables. His steps were slow and steady. Though he was no longer young, the firmness in his movements made Elise believe that the West had molded him into a man who could stand firm even when storms came unexpectedly. Elise stood still, watching him. A warm feeling spread in her chest, familiar yet strange. She stopped running away. She knew she was at a different stage in her life, one she truly wanted to take. Jonah turned and saw Elise's eyes on him. He smiled slightly. She wanted to see the apple orchard. Elise came down the steps. I was about to check, too. They walked into the orchard together. The low branches of the apple trees shook gently in the wind after the storm, a few leaves falling to the damp ground. Elise bent down to pick up a twig. When she touched the trunk, the soft feeling in her hand made her feel lighter. They were still alive, still stronger than she thought. Jonah stood beside her, watching her tenderly caress each little bud. I was worried they might not survive. Elise shook her head. They cling to the ground to survive, just like humans do when they know they have something to hope for. Jonah looked at her longer than he should have. Elise felt something unspoken touch the surface between them, like an undercurrent waiting to find its way out. A moment so fragile, yet so important. He said in a low voice, "Elise, I want to ask you something, but only when you're ready." She felt her heart tighten, but she didn't shy away. He kept asking. Jonah closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his emotions. "I had been thinking about this for months before sending the ad, and since you stepped off the carriage, everything that followed has only made me more certain. Elise, will you be my life partner?" Elise stood still. The wind carried the scent of rain-soaked earth between them, cool and deep. She remembered the years she had spent in seclusion after her loss, the long, sleepless nights when the wind outside seemed to call to her past. Then she remembered the days in Rustic Hollow, when Jonah's hand had held hers with absolute respect. She asked softly, "Why did you choose me?" Jonah didn't think. Because she was real. Because she knew when to be quiet and when to be firm. Because the way she walked into this house made it different. Quiet, but growing warmer with each passing day. And because I've never known anyone as brave as her, even when she thought she had nothing left to hold on to. Elise looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Jonah, I came here looking for a place to start over. I didn't dare ask for more. But what you gave me was something I thought I would never have again." Jonah took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't push her. I just wanted to say that if she agreed, I would walk with her at a slow, steady pace. We'd been through the storm. What lay ahead would be less scary with someone holding my hand." Elise felt a lump in her throat. "Jonah, I may not be the young woman people expect me to be, My past is full of scars, but I want to make this clear. I have begun to feel peace with you. A peace I have forgotten what it looks like. Jonah smiled softly. Elise, I don't need youth. I need honesty. And you have it. Elise stepped closer. Well then, I agreed. Not because I needed a home, but because I wanted someone to spend the rest of my life with, and that person was him. Jonah's smile came slowly in that moment, as if he feared the joy would fade if he rushed. There was no wasted movement, just a warmth that spread across his face, making Elise feel she was being looked at with eyes that were non-judgmental, non-demanding. He held out his hand, not wanting to touch her. Can I hold your hand? Elise placed her hand on his. Okay. They stood in the middle of the apple orchard, still fragrant after the rain, their hands clasped together. Elise could clearly feel the certainty from that hand, not rushing, but enough to make her feel that her choice was not wrong. No one said anything more, but that silence was the most beautiful thing. It was no longer a dividing wall, but a bridge for two hearts to come closer. After a while, Elise spoke up. Do you think the town will talk? Jonah shrugged. Sure, someone will, but they don't live our lives for us. We live our lives for ourselves. I don't need them to understand. I just want you to feel respected. Elise smiled slightly. I think I've been like this for a long time. I just haven't dared to admit it. Jonah held her hand tighter. Then let me speak for you. Elise Warren. You are not old, not late, not any of those things. You are beyond all of that. You are timeless. To me, from the moment I saw you. Elise closed her eyes. Thank you, Jonah, for seeing that in me. They walked together towards the wooden house, slowly and peacefully. A gentle wind blew through the apple trees, carrying the smell of damp leaves and a hint of warm earth. Their steps were in sync with each other, neither fast nor slow, like a new rhythm of life. That afternoon, Jonah wrote a letter to the town to inform the pastor of their decision. Elise prepared a new tablecloth to set on the dining table. Everything was simple, but had a kind of sacredness to it. As the sun sank behind the hills, from pale white to deep gold, Elise and Jonah sat on the porch. They didn't say much, just sat side by side, their eyes on the changing sky. In that moment, Elise realized that the loneliness that had weighed down her heart had melted away. She said softly, Jonah, I am really happy. Jonah placed his hand on hers. Elise. Me too. In the sunset, their hands still held each other, as if promising that the rest of their lives would no longer have silent fears, no longer have long, empty nights. There was only the choice of two hearts that had suffered so much pain, now finding each other at the right time. The story of Elise and Jonah reminds us that age is not a door that closes, but a compass that guides the way. When we have passed half of our lives, we understand the value of kindness, of gentle but sincere handshakes. Love does not seek the youngest person, but seeks the person who is deep enough to understand each other's silence. The most beautiful thing in life is not to start early, but to start with the right person, at the right time when the heart is peaceful enough to open the door again. For anyone who has experienced pain, loss, or judgment, this story is a reminder that it is never too late to heal. Everyone deserves someone who looks at them with a non-judgmental gaze, a gaze that says you are still valuable. Thank you for accompanying us to the end of the story. Your presence is the greatest honor. If the story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can send you more journeys of healing and love.